the man who gives the adhan. What are the qualities that he should possess? There are a number of qualities mentioned here, and we should bring to your attention that scholars differed which is important, to give the adhan or prayer, because the hadith states clearly that on the day of judgment, the longest among the people's necks would be the people who call the adhan. They would be like very long necks. No, this is an Arabic metaphor of honor and dignity. On the day of judgment, people would realize and notice that, wow, these people who used to call the adhan, look at them with all this glory, with all this honor that Allah has given them. Also, we know that the Prophet told us, alayhi salatu wasalam, when a person calls the adhan, no tree, nor rock, nor human being or jinn hearing this adhan, except he will testify for him on the day of judgment. So scholars said, by far this is greater than being the mu'adhin. And it was counterattacked by the other party saying, no, the imam is far better than being the mu'adhin. Prophet ﷺ and Ali called the adhan. And if it was a good deed, they would have done this. So those in the beginning, this is not an evidence, because the Prophet ﷺ did not call the adhan simply because he had more important things for the ummah, for Muslims, than giving the adhan. So he was the teacher, he was the judge, he was the general, he was the husband, he was this and that, and devoting yourself to the adhan would jeopardize fulfilling the rights of all whom you're responsible for when you are in the status of the. So either way, it is something that Muslims should fight over. This is a figure of speech, if they can. The Prophet ﷺ said in an authentic hadith, if the people were to know the reward on calling the adhan and on praying in the first row, they would have fought for it, which would, who's more entitled for this from the other. This is by far a great form of worship that we should be all considering. So what are the mu'adhin? Number one, be an honest, trustworthy person. Why is that? Because by giving the adhan, the Muslim ummah is following you to start their prayers, and the Muslim ummah is refraining from fasting when it's the break of dawn, or breaking their fast when it is Maghrib time. So if a person who's calling the adhan is not honest, is not trustworthy, he simply feels hungry, so 5-10 minutes before Maghrib he calls the adhan, he doesn't care. Of course, this would negatively influence the Muslims' rituals and forms of worship, and hence a person who calls the adhan must not be any Tom, Dick or Harry, rather should have such qualities as honesty and being trustworthy. Secondly, he should be a sane adult. So someone who's insane, someone who is hallucinating or has psychiatric problems should not call the adhan, because we don't trust that he would be qualified to do so on time as prescribed. As for the adult part, well, this is recommended, but if the boy is, as they say, distinguished, someone who is like 10, 11 years of age, knows what he's doing, in this case, he can call the adhan without a problem, inshallah. Number 3, he should know the time. Not know the times of prayers. How would he call the adhan? Depending on other masjids, which means that he's going to be late. So most likely this is among the things that a person should know about, so that he has to know when the Fajr breaks, when the Dhuhr starts after the Zawal, when the Asr begins, when the Maghrib begins, when Isha begins, and so forth, so that he would be doing this great form of worship backed by a person does not know, as in the case of someone who's blind or someone who is ignorant, but he's sane, adult. If there was someone to tell him who is trustworthy as well, who's knowledgeable, then this is okay. Hadith of Abdullah ibn Maktoum, may Allah be pleased with him, the blind man, he used to call the adhan for Fajr, and definitely he is unable to see the break of dawn. Rather, the companion, it is time for Fajr adhan, go and make adhan, he would do that. Number 4, he should have a loud voice, because it defies the adhan to call it in a very soft voice. So a person who does not have a good voice shouldn't call the adhan, because it would not reach people. And in the hadith of the adhan, Abdullah ibn Zayd, which we mentioned last time, the Prophet ﷺ ordered him to teach Bilal, the Abyssinian, because his voice is tender and more. So instead of Abdullah ibn Zayd giving the adhan, though he was the one who saw it in the dream, the Prophet told him ﷺ to give it to Bilal ibn Rabah. May Allah be pleased with them all. Nowadays, with the microphones and loudspeakers, neglected the issue of having a loud voice, because simply the person who would be far greater than normal. Number 5, this one is not correct, so you should cross it over. He should purify himself after any discharge that invalidates ablution. And the vast majority of scholars say that the person calling the adhan is not obliged to be in the state of wudu. It is recommended, but it's not mandatory. And this is the doing of most muadhins who live adjacent to the masjid. They leave their homes, give the adhan and come back, and then perform wudu, wear, get dressed, and then come for salat. So it is not mandatory and it's not a condition. Number 6, he should say the adhan facing the Qiblah. And again, this is not mandatory. This is highly recommended. Facing the Qiblah while giving the adhan is highly recommended. But if the Qiblah is here and the microphone is here and I do my adhan like this, this is valid and the adhan is accepted. Number 7, he should place his oh, let me see, there's all the settings are the same. So if the picture is not appearing, I don't know what has happened, unfortunately, but c'est la vie. It says that he should place his 4 fingers in his ears and turn his face to the hayya ala salat and to the left when saying hayya. Now this was reported, and putting the fingers in the ears is that you sort of mute your hearing, so that when you make the adhan loudly, because you're not hearing it, you actually reach the max. And saying hayya ala salat, hayya ala al falah, this so that your voice would cover a larger area. But nowadays, with the microphone, this defies the purpose of it, and one should not do it. Putting your fingers in your ears presence of the microphones, you don't need to do this. Now when you go and say hayya ala salat, the voice would go drastically down and the loudspeakers would fail to deliver your voice to the world. So by left, which initially was to have the spread of your voice all over around, is happening when you do this in front of the microphone. So one should not do it at all. It's not a sunnah. It is something that was done for a purpose. And the purpose is defied here while using the microphone. He should elongate the adhan and be quick with the iqamah. This is number 8. And this is true. The adhan should be given over a longer period of time, not just for melodic purposes, rather to ensure that it had reached as much as people as we can get our voices to. Why? When you say Allahu Akbar, it's different than saying Allahu Akbar. When you say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, it's different than Ashhadu an la ilaha. See, it's getting longer, and those who missed the few seconds before cannot miss this longer version. So it's much better to prolong your adhan than to do it shortly. And as for the iqamah, it should be done in a quick and fast fashion. Section, what is said, without going into details, and some of the material might not be accurate. For example, in the first line it says an Abu Mahdura, and this is not true. The right thing is adhan of Bilal. Why is there is difference of opinion and confusion among the four schools of thought? Because there are a number of narrations, and from each narration an imam took what he believes is the most authentic. So when you come to Imam Shafi'i and Imam Malik, they both adopted the adhan of Abi Mahdhura. Abu Mahdhura was a companion, may Allah be pleased with him, and he was a young boy when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam opened and conquered Mecca on the 8th year of Hijrah, the conquest of Mecca. And while the adhan was being given, a number of boys were mocking the adhan. And the Prophet ﷺ heard the voice of Abu Mahdhura, who was mocking the adhan. So he ordered the companions to bring him. So they brought Abu Mahdhura. And he was a kid. So the Prophet wiped over his chest and head and taught him how to give the adhan properly. And he became the mu'adhin, one of the mu'adhins of the Prophet ﷺ. His adhan is different than the adhan of Bilal. And the adhan of Bilal is being followed by Imam Ahmad and others. The adhan of Bilal is composed of 15 phrases. It's what we hear all over the world. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salati, hayya ala salat, hayya ala al-falahi, hayya ala al-falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. Everybody knows this, of course. Imam Malik says, no, the adhan is 17 sentences or phrases. Imam Shafi'i says, no, the adhan is 19. Whoa, that's a big difference. How does Imam Malik say the adhan? Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i have something common in between them as they follow the adhan of Abi Mahdhura, may Allah be pleased with him. Adhan Abi Mahdhura, the Prophet taught him alayhi salatu wasalam to do what is known as at-tarji'. Tarji' is to repeat. So again, what is tarji'? At-tarji' is when you come to the shahada after takbir, you say in a low voice, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. These are 4 sentences. Then you say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and you continue the adhan. So Imam Shafi'i says, the adhan of Bilal, 15 sentences, we add these 4 silent phrases before continuing the adhan, known as what? At-tarji'. Imam Malik agrees. But instead of saying Allahu Akbar 4 times in the beginning, he says it 2 times. So it's like Bilal's adhan minus 2, which is 13, plus 4, which is a tarji', which makes it 17. Imam Ahmad says all is accepted because all is authentic. But the most famous would be the adhan of Bilal. How many phrases? 15 phrases. And we have in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe the 10th, where it talks about the iqamah as follows. Here it says, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu Muhammadan Rasulullah, Hayya ala salati, Hayya al falah, Qad qamat salat, qam salah. Allahu Akbar, there's one missing. So it's a typo. So it should be Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. Now, Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him, was instructed to repeat the wording twice in the adhan and once in the iqamah, with the exception of the phrase قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ. And this is the iqamah we all know. So it's repeated once rather than the adhan twice. In Abu Hanifa's madhab, school of thought, his iqamah is like the adhan. So if you go to Hanafi dominated areas, you would hear the iqamah exactly like the adhan. The only difference would be قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ قَدْ قَامَتِ الصَّلَاةُ. But the rest, the takbir is 4, shahada is 2, shahada of the Prophet is 2, hayya ala salah, hayya ala salah twice, etc. And all inshallah is accepted, and there's no problem in that. Now, when we come to Fajr prayer, Fajr, as we indicated before, the sunnah is to have 2 adhan. One is a reminder for those who are asleep to wake up and have the pre-dawn meal if they're interested in fasting. And it's a reminder to those who are praying tahajjud. In the middle of the night, you're praying tahajjud, you are weeping, you are loving what you are doing, you're contemplating on the ayat. You lose track of time. So the adhan, the first adhan of Fajr, comes as a reminder that, listen, in few minutes, it will be time for Fajr, and you have to perform your witr. This adhan is a normal adhan, 15 phrases. The other adhan, which allows us to pray Fajr, which prohibits us from eating when fasting. This is the real McCoy. This is the real thing, the real deal. This adhan has 17 phrases. The same as Bilal's adhan, with the introduction of As-salatu khayrun minan nawm, As-salatu khayrun minan nawm. Prayer is better than sleeping. Prayer is better than sleeping. And this was an authentic hadith which Abu Mahdura mentions that the Prophet ﷺ instructed him to say. And all the Muslims all over the world have been saying. Now, what to say when hearing the adhan? So we know that the Prophet said, ﷺ, whoever hears the adhan and repeats after him, the muadhin, and then asks Allah for the wasila, then he will win my intercession on the Day of Judgment. So whenever you hear the adhan, you should say whatever the muadhin is saying. The muadhin says, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. You repeat that exactly. But when he says, Hayya ala salat, come to prayer, Hayya ala al-falah, come to success, the sunnah is to say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Because you cannot do any of these things, that is attending the salat and success, without the power of Allah and Allah making you able to do that. So the sunnah is to repeat it 4 times during the adhan. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, you repeat it 4 times. And after the adhan is over, La ilaha illallah, You offer salutation to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and then you ask Allah Azza wa Jal the famous dua, which you say, Allahumma rabba hadihi ad-da'wati at-tamma was-salati al-qa'imah آتي محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه اللهم المقام المحمود الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد. The dua is found in the Fortress of Muslim. You can find it without any problem, insha'Allah Azza wa Jal. Okay, question, Sheikh. You said that we should repeat everything we hear as the Mu'adhin says it, except when it comes to Hayya ala salat, we say La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. What about in Fajr, when the Mu'adhin says As-salatu khayrun minan nawm? What should we say? It's an issue of dispute among scholars. The most authentic opinion is that you repeat it as it is, because we only have La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, which is said differently than the phrases of the Adhan. And this was the command of the Prophet ﷺ. As for As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm, we have nothing to, how do you say that? To support saying anything other than it. So it falls under the general guidelines. The default is to repeat it. So you say As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm, As-salatu khayrun min al-nawm. Now we move on.